Hey everybody, quick review of solving quadratic equations. That's right, it's time for math with Mr. Troy. Alright folks, the focus of this unit was on different ways that you can solve quadratic equations. And we've got three different ways that we've talked about. Factoring. Factoring is the fastest way, if you know how to do it, that works for a whole bunch of problems. The quadratic formula is the way that works for any problem whatsoever. And the square root method is a way that works for a smaller set of problems, but is really, really easy once you figure out how to do it. Let's take a look at each one of these. Okay, so we're going to start with this equation here. And this is actually probably the hardest example of an equation in Algebra 1 that you might solve by using the square root method. So the first thing you want to know about the square root method is that you're going to use it when you can figure out that the variable is squared but only occurs once in the equation. So because I only see x here, and it's inside of a square, I know that it's okay to use this method. And the way that you use this method is you isolate the thing being squared. So if it's x minus 3 all squared, I'm going to get x minus 3 all squared by itself. I'm going to do that the same way I would do that with a linear equation. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. Then I'm going to divide by 2. Again, the reason I'm choosing to do that is because what I'm trying to do is to get x minus 3 squared all by itself. Now, when you look at this, you could say, whoa, hold on, I know that 7 squared is 49. So if I plugged in x equals 10, I would do my parentheses first, 10 minus 3, that's 7, and then when I square it, I get 49. So I know that's one of the solutions. Now for the other solution, well, the other thing that I can square is negative 7. And if I square that, I'll get 49. But that doesn't mean that the answer to this is negative 10. If I did negative 10 minus 3, it'd give me negative 13. And if I square that, I get 169, which isn't 49. So how do I get that other answer? How do I get that thing that'll give me negative 7 squared? Well, the way that I like to think about it is I like to think about splitting it into two equations. I like to think of saying, I'd really like to take the square root here. I know that square rooting gives me a plus and a minus. So I could have either x minus 3 equals negative 7, which is the square root of 49, or x minus 3 equals positive 7. This is the equation that gives me 10. And this is the equation that gives me negative 4. So we actually had to move the opposite direction. Okay. That is a review of solving by the square root method. So next I might want to solve using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula works for any quadratic equation. Remember, a quadratic equation is something that has an x squared in it and no bigger exponents. So it can have an x, it can have constant terms, but it cannot have an x cubed or an x to the 7th or anything like that. So I could take this equation, 2x squared minus 19x plus 25 equals 105. And I could solve this equation by using the quadratic formula. Now the first step of the quadratic formula is to get 0 on one side of your equation. So in that case, I would get rid of the 105. So I would get 2x squared minus 19x minus 80. From there, I'm going to label my A, my B, and my C. So that's the quadratic coefficient the linear coefficient and the constant term. So here a equals 2, b equals negative 19, and c equals negative 80. Now, do you remember the quadratic formula? Well, here it is. X equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2. All right, so x equals the opposite of b. Now, this is the most common mistake. The opposite of negative 19 is positive 19. Plus or minus the square root of negative 19 squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. Now, if you got a big enough calculator, you can plug that whole thing in, but we probably want to talk about how you would do that, using your brain instead of using your thumbs. Okay, so the best way to start is underneath the parentheses. We're just going to leave the 19 and the 4. We can write that as 4 if we want, but leave those mostly alone. Plus or minus. Big square root, so 19 squared is 361, which means that's also what negative 19 squared is. So 361 minus 4 times 2 times negative 80. The fact that there is a double negative there, the negative 4 or the minus 4, and the negative 80, means that you're actually going to end up adding. So not minus here, but instead plus, and then whatever 4 times 2 times 80 is. So that's 640. Now, remember that the square root, since it's a function, it acts like a grouping symbol. So we need to actually combine underneath the square root first. You'll learn in Algebra 2 that's because that's an exponent. So that actually equals 1001. So x equals 19 plus or minus the square root of 1001 all over 4. Now here's the thing. I don't know the square root of 1001. It doesn't really have a nice square root. So we're going to need to use a calculator for that. It turns out that it's like 31.64. So x equals 19 plus or minus about 31.64 all over 4. And the way you simplify that down is you break up the plus or minus, just like we did in our last problem. 19 plus 31.64 over 4. And 19 minus 31.64 all over 4. The way that you simplify these is you do 19 plus 31.64, then divide that by 4. 19 minus 31.64, then divide that by 4. So if you're going to use your calculator, you'd type in the numerator as one step, hit enter, then divide by 4. And our answer for those are about, and these are these are estimates, not abbreviations, these are approximations, about 12.66 and about negative 3.16. Okay, that would be how you would use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. Okay, our last topic is solving by factoring. Now, before we go into factoring, we kind of need to do this in reverse. Here's literally the most important thing. If I say x times 7 equals 0, x has to be 0. Because the only thing you can multiply by something and get nothing is nothing. If I say x times x minus 3 equals 0, x could be 0, because 0 times something equals nothing, or x could be 3. If you plug in 3 times nothing equals 0. Finally, if I say x plus 2 times x minus 3 equals 0, x could be negative 2, or x could be positive 3. Negative 2, because if you plug that in here and here, you get 0 times negative 5, and that does equal 0. Positive 3, because if you plug that in here and here, you'd get 5 times 0, which is 0. So the idea of factoring, solving in that particular way, is to say, can I write my equation like this? Because that way I can pick out what I could plug in to get 0 for my equation. All right, so let's say I have an equation like this. I cannot use the square root method because my variable shows up in two different places. Now, in Algebra 2, you'll learn a way to kind of change the equation to make that happen, but we're not going to cover that here. I could use the quadratic formula, but the quadratic formula is slow. And sometimes you feel like you need to have a calculator in order to make it work. So factoring is this other method. Now, you may notice when you look at this equation that each side of the equation only has multiples of 3. You probably want to get x squared by itself in order to factor 1x squared. Not like get rid of all of the x's, but like don't work with 3x squared. So we're going to start by dividing by 3. And we're going to get x squared equals 2x plus 8. Now, to factor, you want to move everything to the same side of the equation. So minus 2x minus 8 if I move those across the equal sign. The key to factoring is saying what multiplies to this and adds to that? What multiplies to negative 8 and adds to negative 2? Well, the things that multiply to negative 8 are 1 and negative 8, or negative 1 and positive 8, 2 and negative 4, or negative 2 and positive 4. Now, which of those also add to negative 2? Well, this adds to negative 7, so that's not right. This adds to positive 7. This adds to, negative 2. 2 minus 4 is negative 2. So that tells you that your factored form is x plus 2 times x minus 4 equals 0. Now, here's the part that some people find confusing. Those are not the solutions to your equations. The solutions to your equation are how do I make x plus 2 equal to 0? Or how do I make x minus 4 equal to 0? So the solution to your equation is actually x equals negative 2 or x equals positive 4. All right, folks, I hope you found that helpful. I'm going to post some optional review, and then you're going to take a test tomorrow. That test is going to go towards your e-learning grade, so it's not going to be worth a whole bunch. You do not need to worry about it hurting your grade. I hope you're listening to this part of the video because I want you to know that, okay? This is just a chance for you to figure out, do I know how to solve equations? Because you are going to have to use these in geometry. Okay, thanks for watching. See you later. Oh, yeah, bye.